The scent of cinnamon and butter drifted through the small apartment as I slid the last tray of cookies onto the counter. The fading December light came in, slanted through the cracked window above the sink, carrying a salty chill from the ocean. I had promised myself a quiet Christmas Eve, the kind where the only company was the radio humming old carols and the memory of Robert's steady laugh that still lived somewhere in the walls. I didn't expect the phone to ring at all, but when it did, the name flashing on the screen was one I knew too well. My daughter's voice came brisk and clipped, like she had rehearsed it. She said the holiday would be simple this year, just her husband's family. Her words slid into the air as though they'd been settled for weeks, as though I were too irrelevant to even argue. The pause between us was heavy, and I knew she was waiting for me to beg, waiting for me to plead for a place at the table, to remind her that I raised her alone when Robert died, that I kept the lights on and the pantry stocked, even when it meant clipping coupons until my fingers cramped. Instead, I smiled to myself and told her to enjoy it. Her silence stuttered before I hung up. My hands were no longer shaking when I placed the receiver back on the cradle. On the table beside the cooling cookies sat a small velvet pouch, its weight familiar. I loosened the strings and let the gold keys fall into my palm. They gleamed under the kitchen light, cool metal fresh from the safe where they had been hidden. Escrow had closed only 3 days before. The oceanfront house above T Street was now mine, every window and rafter purchased in full. Tomorrow those keys would open more than doors. They would open the beginning of something I had waited years to claim. I placed them back into the pouch and poured myself a cup of coffee steam, fogging the window as I let memories rise with it. Robert never liked to talk big, but he was curious, deliberate. Back in the 90s, while friends scoffed at tech bubbles, he bought shares in companies no one understood. Apple Nvidia names that looked fragile then, but his patience turned them into treasure after he was gone. I never touched those accounts. I let time work. And when my aunt left me her dusty acreage outside Temecula, people laughed. Too dry, too far from anywhere worthless. But I held on. When developers swarmed after a zoning change, I sold for a number that startled even my financial advisor, then rolled it into something real, something with walls of glass looking straight at the Pacific. Meanwhile, I kept driving my aging sedan and cashing in coupons at the grocery store. I let my daughter believe her checks for help with groceries made the difference. I wanted to see who she really was when she thought I had nothing. That afternoon, Mrs. Jensen from upstairs caught me with the trash and pulled up her phone. She showed me a group chat screenshot. My daughter had written Mom canceled Christmas herself. She wants to be alone. The words cut sharper than the phone call. Not only excluded, but erased. It would have been easier if she had shouted at me, told me directly she was embarrassed of me. Instead, she rewrote the truth for everyone else to read. I folded the sting into memory as carefully as the keys back into their pouch. The next morning, I drove down the Pacific Coast Highway, the sea glittering to my right, and turned onto the hidden lane leading to my new home. The gate swung open silently. For a long moment, I sat in the car and stared at the house, perched above the bluff sunlight spilling across the pale stucco walls. Inside, the designer paced across the great room with her tablet already envisioning the Christmas tree reaching the vaulted ceiling, the terrace lined with banquet tables that would look over the ocean. Her excitement buzzed around me, but what I felt was steadier. This house would no longer be empty. It would be filled with people who actually wanted to be there. The first call I made was to Roxana, a cousin in Sacramento, who had been quietly dropped from invitations years ago. Her voice caught in surprise when I asked her to come. Then I called Mateo Grease, still under his fingernails from years at the shop. His laugh thundered down the line when I told him. "Your daughter told me you didn't want company anymore," he said. I replied simply, "She was wrong." And so the list grew: neighbors who once brought casseroles on Sundays, church friends who had stopped asking after too many of my daughter's polite lies, and even the non-profit director I had supported quietly for years, who offered to bring her young musicians to play on the terrace. By dusk that day, more than 30 voices had promised to come, and I knew this was only the beginning. By Christmas Eve morning, the house hummed with preparation. Caterers carried in crates of Pacific crab citrus from Riverside and cases of sparkling wine. The scent of herbs rose from copper pots lined on the counters. White lights climbed the arches, while garlands wound around terrace railings. Poinsettias in terracotta pots glowed against the pale stucco. It no longer felt like a blank house. It felt alive, waiting. In my room, I lifted the pearls my mother had worn only once at her wedding. They rested against my collarbone like cool memory, but when I saw them in the mirror, they no longer looked antique. They looked ready. My phone buzzed again, another screenshot from a neighbor. My daughter had written in a thread, "We kept it family only this year. Mom will be fine with her Hallmark movies." The words were casual, cruel, dismissive. I set the phone beside the pearls. Outside lights twinkled on the terrace where people were stringing garlands and tuning violins. On one side, I was erased. On the other, I was being written back into existence by choice, by those who still believed respect mattered. By dusk, the house would prove which story endured. As the sun began to sink, the first guests arrived. Coats shrugged off laughter spilling into the great room, the Pacific glowing behind them in deep orange. Mateo raised his glass, first calling me the aunt who never forgot a birthday, and reminding everyone that family was chosen as much as born. Roxana told a childhood story about sharing mittens by kerosene light, her words catching as she gestured at the lights and sea. "My sister has turned winter into gold," she said, and the room answered with warmth. Music swelled softly in the background as plates of crab and citrus salad passed hand to hand, glasses clinking. I stepped aside for a moment and captured the terrace with my phone light's face's joy. I posted it with one caption, celebrating with the family who chose me. The screen filled quickly with comments from old friends, distant cousins, neighbors I hadn't seen in years. My phone buzzed steady until the first call came from my daughter. Then another. Then another. 20 calls by the time the trays of crab reached the table. But I set the phone face down beside my glass, letting it hum unnoticed while laughter rose around me. Later, when curiosity tugged, I checked and found voice messages. 2 from her clipped and sharp. The third from Miles, my grandson. "Grandma, are you watching fireworks on TV? I thought you always watched with me." His small voice pierced deeper than anything else. Whatever bitterness his mother held, the child's love was untouched. I pressed the phone to my chest for a moment, steadying myself against the sound of waves. When I rejoined the table, I raised my glass. Tonight I told them, and the room quieted. We remind ourselves that respect is the true centerpiece of any gathering. Without it, even the finest table is empty. With it, even simple bread tastes of abundance. The words circled back in echoes of glasses and cheers, and I recorded the moment, quietly posting it alongside a clip of glowing candles and joyful faces. Hearts and exclamation marks poured in affirmations, stacking until I could barely keep up. For once, the outside world was echoing what I already felt inside: steadiness, dignity, worth. But just as dessert trays began to appear, the sound of tires on gravel shifted the night. Headlights swept across the driveway, a door slammed, then another. Conversations faltered, forks stilled. I didn't need to look to know who had come. My daughter's heels clicked sharp against the stone walk, her husband trailing behind. They stepped into the light of the terrace silhouettes drawn tight. I rose slowly, meeting them in the foyer beneath the chandelier's fractured glow. The chandelier threw fractured light across the marble floor as I faced them. My daughter entered first, her chin-raised eyes hard with brittle control. Adrian followed Shoulder's tense gaze, darting across the arches like he had wandered into a house that belonged to someone else. "You've been ignoring our calls," she said sharply, but beneath the edge, I caught disbelief. I gestured toward the study where a leather folio waited on the desk, and they followed hesitantly. From the folder, I slid out a crisp document, the deed with my name in bold. "This is mine," I told them, "paid in full from the land and investments your father and I built long before you were born." Adrian stared at the paper, lips parting, while my daughter's hand hovered above it as though touching it might burn. "All this time, you let us think you were struggling," she whispered, her mask faltering. I answered evenly, "I let you see what you wanted to see. It showed me who you were." The words sliced through her poise. She dropped the polished exterior for something rawer. She confessed how hard it was trying to impress her husband's family, how every casserole I brought, every thrift store dress felt like judgment in their eyes. She said she was ashamed not of me, but of how they measured her through me. For years, she had carried that fear, turning it into cruelty, cutting me out before they could cut her. I listened, not flinching. "So you disinvited me?" I said. "You told others I canceled Christmas, you mocked my gifts, you twisted every kindness into shame. That was not about them, that was about you." Her eyes glistened with tears she fought to hide. Adrian shifted beside her, rubbing his nose, silent. For once, silence did not shield him. I turned to him. "You let her do it. You watched her push me aside year after year and said nothing. You called it keeping peace, but peace isn't silence. Silence is cowardice dressed up as harmony." His shoulders sagged under the truth, and for a moment the house was filled only with the muffled sound of music and laughter drifting from the terrace. My daughter finally broke her voice, shaking. "You don't know what it's like." I was terrified of being looked down on. "I thought if I made space for you, I would lose everything I was trying to build." The words hung between us, heavy with the honesty of insecurity. I walked to the glass doors and pulled them open. Light and laughter spilled in 35 guests who had come without hesitation, who needed no image polished. "Look," I told them. "They came because they wanted to. Because respect was already in the room." Adrian stared at the scene as though stripped of excuses. My daughter's tears came harder, shame mixing with stubbornness. I closed the doors again, shutting out the noise. "From now on," I said, "steady respect is the ticket of entry here. If you want a place again, there are conditions. Therapy with me present. A month where you ask nothing, no favors, no money, only actions that prove you understand respect. And a public apology to those you excluded in my name." She did not argue. Adrian nodded weakly. I opened the folio once more and slid forward another document, the first draft of my trust. "Miles will inherit only if he proves himself through kindness and service. Wealth without values is poison." Her voice cracked. "Is there a way back?" I met her eyes. "There is, but it won't be easy. Yes is not enough. Work is required." The chandelier flickered above us, as though underlining the moment. I dismissed them quietly, returning to the terrace where warmth swallowed me again. The guests hadn't lost their joy, the music still weaving with the sound of waves. I smiled, but inside, I carried the weight of what had passed. The night was not ruined. It had simply revealed what needed to be faced. The following morning, I walked the bluff trail behind the house, air-sharp with salt pelicans skimming the waves like signatures. Every step reminded me this home was not just shelter, but a line drawn between what I had endured and what I would no longer accept. Later that day, I signed papers to formalize the peninsula table, a monthly dinner for elders across the county. No one excluded for age, income, or appearance. It was the legacy I wanted carved into this house, a community rooted in dignity. For a time, things quieted. My phone stayed still, though messages trickled in. Friends who had seen the photos sent encouragement. Neighbors asked when they could visit. But eventually, the family storm returned. My daughter sent a screenshot of a therapy appointment. Then a drawing from Miles arrived, childish letters scrawled Grandma's house by the water. The crayon lines of blue and yellow struck deeper than any apology. He wanted to be part of my world, even if the adults around him had tried to wall it off. Weeks passed. My daughter and Adrian came to therapy, though often defensive. They nodded at lessons but resisted change. My son-in-law admitted he chose silence because conflict frightened him more than injustice. My daughter wept when pressed, admitting she had lied to relatives out of fear they'd prefer me to her. Slowly, very slowly, cracks opened into possibility. But outside those sessions, pressure mounted. My brother called, telling me to soften. Old relatives hinted I was tearing the family apart. And still, I remembered every coupon clipped, every birthday alone, every whisper of shame, and I held firm. Then came the night of the confrontation I had not anticipated. My daughter appeared at my gate with Adrian beside her. It was late, the terrace empty, the house quiet. They looked smaller than before, their confidence thinned. She said she had tried to explain to Miles why I wasn't there for Christmas morning, and his tears had shaken her. For the first time, she admitted she was wrong. Not completely, not without defensiveness, but enough that I felt the weight shift. Adrian said he wanted to learn how to step up, how not to hide behind silence. I listened, cautious but open. I told them forgiveness was not a single gesture. It was a long road paved with actions, not words. They would need to show consistency before I believed. They agreed, perhaps out of desperation, perhaps from genuine change. I would have to wait and see. For now, I offered them coffee, and we sat together at the long table beneath the glass walls. The ocean stretched black and infinite outside. It was not reconciliation, not yet, but it was the first time in years we shared a table without pretense. After they left, I stayed awake long into the night, turning over the echoes of their voices. The line between weakness and hope blurred, and I knew the work was only beginning. Still as dawn broke and light touched the waves, I felt steadier than before. This was my house, my rules, my dignity reclaimed. And anyone who entered would know that truth. The new year settled like a tide, steady at first, but beneath the calm ran currents of unease. My daughter and Adrian attended therapy, but their progress was fragile. Sometimes they arrived defensive, sometimes tearful, and often they left looking more bewildered than relieved. I tried to keep my heart measured, neither slamming doors shut nor swinging them wide open. The line I had drawn around my life was still fresh, and I would not let anyone erase it again. In the weeks that followed, the wider family grew restless. My brother called, pressing me to soften my stance, accusing me of destroying the fragile fabric of kinship. Old cousins sent messages thick with guilt, reminding me of childhood holidays, as though sentiment alone could erase years of dismissal. I did not waver. The house on the bluff became both shield and beacon. Friends came, often filling the terrace with warmth, and each gathering felt like proof that I was not wrong to choose a family of respect over one of blood alone. But trouble has a way of circling back. One evening, I returned from the market to find an envelope slipped under my gate. Inside were photographs printed from social media. My posts of the Christmas gathering, the toast, the music, the smiles, all annotated in red ink with bitter notes. Performance, pretend, humiliation. At the bottom, a single line, family forgives. Why can't you? The handwriting was my daughter's. My hands trembled only for a moment before I slid the envelope into the fire. Forgiveness would never be wrestled from me through guilt. Even so, a part of me remained soft toward Miles. The child had no role in his mother's choices, no hand in the lies told. He sent me more drawings, his words shaky but hopeful. "Grandma, will you bake cookies again? And I want to see the ocean." His innocence made the bitterness harder to carry. I began to wonder whether I could open the gate to him without opening it to the others. When I raised this in therapy, my daughter looked stricken, then confessed she had used my absence as punishment against him. She told him I was too busy, that I didn't want to see him all to preserve her own pride. The counselor's gaze hardened as she pointed out the cruelty of using a child as shield. My daughter wept. Adrian for once defended me, admitting aloud that he had stayed silent too long. That session felt like a crack in the stone, small but undeniable. Still, the family outside the therapy room continued their storm. My cousin Matteo called furious after being cornered by Adriani's parents at a dinner. They accused me of staging Christmas to shame them of flaunting wealth to embarrass my daughter. Matteo defended me with fire, but the accusation hurt. I had not built my home as a weapon. It was meant as sanctuary. Yet I realized no matter my intent, those determined to twist it would do so. I could not control their narrative. Only mine. In February, I hosted the first Peninsula table dinner. Elders from across the county arrived hesitantly, at first coats buttoned tight against the evening chill. But once inside, the atmosphere shifted. They shared soup and bread, stories of long careers and quiet losses, laughter that grew stronger as the night stretched. Many admitted they hadn't been invited anywhere in months, some even years. Watching them, I felt the house come alive in the way I had dreamed. It was no longer about proving anything to my daughter. It was about planting something new in the ashes of what had burned. Afterward, one woman pressed my hand and whispered, "You reminded me I matter." Those words became the cornerstone of my resolve. Whatever storms family might bring, I had built something that could not be undone by lies or silence. Respect lived here now, but the peace did not last. One night, long past midnight, I was woken by pounding at the gate. My phone buzzed with missed calls as I stumbled to the window. Outside, headlights washed the driveway. When I answered, my daughter's voice cracked through the speaker. "It's Miles. He won't stop crying. He wants you. Please, just tonight." Her desperation rang raw, stripped of pride. I hesitated, heart pulled in two directions. My rules had been clear. My boundaries had cost me dearly to build. But the image of my grandson sobbing in the dark pierced every defense. I opened the gate. Adrian drove slowly up the lane, my daughter in the passenger seat, eyes swollen. Miles ran from the car and threw his arms around me, his small body shaking. I carried him inside, while his parents lingered near the doorway, uncertain. He calmed only after I promised to show him the ocean at sunrise. That night, he slept curled beside me, clutching one of Robert's old scarves. In the quiet, I felt both fierce love and heavy dread. Allowing him in meant the walls had cracked. Could I manage to let the child in without letting his parents dismantle everything I had built? At dawn, we walked the trail together. Miles gasped at the pelicans and the wide sky, his small hand warm in mine. When we returned, his parents waited at the table, humbled. My daughter whispered, "Thank you." Adrian only nodded, eyes heavy with exhaustion. I poured coffee and told them plainly this cannot be another manipulation. If you want me in his life, you must respect the boundaries I have drawn. They agreed quickly, too quickly, but I let the moment stand. For the child's sake, I would try. In the weeks that followed, their efforts grew steadier. Therapy sessions deepened. Apologies, though imperfect, began to take root. They attended the next peninsula dinner quietly at first, but Adrian even offered to help serve plates. My daughter stayed near me not with pride, but with something closer to humility. For the first time in years, I saw glimpses of the girl she had been before fear hardened her. The progress was fragile, but it was progress nonetheless. Still, I knew storms could return at any moment. Trust, once broken, is not restored overnight. It is built brick by brick, and every brick must be tested. Some evenings, I sat alone on the terrace, watching the Pacific swallow the sun, wondering if I had the strength to keep building. But then I remembered Miles's drawing Grandma's house by the water, and I knew why I must. Spring rolled into summer, and with it came a fragile rhythm of change. Therapy sessions grew less combative, more reflective. My daughter began sending me short messages that asked nothing of me, just simple updates about Miles, pictures of him painting at school, or of him holding a seashell at the beach. Adrian, once so silent, surprised me one afternoon by calling on his own. He said he had signed up to volunteer at a local food bank. It was awkward, halting, but genuine. Small steps, yes, but steps nonetheless. The wider family, however, remained a storm of opinions. My brother accused me of playing favorites, relatives gossiped about grand performances, and even old neighbors hinted I was too proud. For every gesture of healing from my daughter's household, another wave of doubt crashed from outside. Yet each time I considered retreating, I remembered the dinners on my terrace, the elders finding community, the laughter spilling against the rhythm of the waves. That was proof enough that my path was steady. One evening in June, I hosted another gathering at the house. Strings of lights stretched across the terrace, music drifted from young violinists, and the long tables glowed with candles. This time, my daughter and Adrian came early, helping to set out plates and chairs. Miles dashed around with the other children, his joy unshadowed. At one point, he tugged my sleeve, showing me a seashell he had painted bright blue. "For you, Grandma," he said, eyes shining. The simplicity of it brought tears I hadn't expected. Later that night, as guests lingered with coffee and pie, I raised my glass once more. Respect, I said to them all, is not a word, but a practice. Tonight, we prove again that family is chosen, and chosen by actions, not by excuses. Applause answered me warm and unforced. I caught my daughter's eyes across the table. She did not look away. Something unspoken passed between us, acknowledgement, perhaps even a beginning of amends, but healing is never linear. In July, tension snapped again. A message spread through relatives claiming I was rewriting my will to exclude blood, entirely giving everything to strangers. The rumor carried my daughter's handwriting, though she denied it in therapy. I confronted her gently, asking why fear made her lash out. She crumbled, admitting she worried every day that I would erase her completely. "You erased me first," I reminded her softly. Silence followed, and the counselor's pen scratched across paper. It was then I realized forgiveness was not a single door swinging open. It was a long corridor, each step earned by truth. I could not guarantee we would reach the end, but I could choose to keep walking as long as respect held steady. By autumn, the trust documents were finalized. My daughter and Adrian signed their commitments, therapy apologies, proof of service. Miles's share was set with conditions, community work, kindness, and responsibility. I read the clauses aloud at the terrace table, candles flickering, family and friends as witnesses. My daughter's hands trembled as she signed her part. Adrian, too, leaned heavier on the pen than necessary, but when it was done, I felt a weight ease from my chest. The lines had been drawn in ink now, not just in words. On Thanksgiving, I opened the doors wide. not just to family, but to neighbors, friends, elders, and children who had nowhere else to go. 40 people filled the house, their voices weaving together, until the walls themselves seemed to hum. My daughter helped serve. Adrian carved the turkey. Miles stood proudly beside me as we welcomed everyone in. At one point, I slipped outside onto the bluff and let the ocean air wash over me. The house behind me glowed warm against the dusk. It struck me then, dignity had been the first gift I gave myself. But the second gift was something larger: space. Space for those who respected me, for those willing to meet me with truth. Not everyone would fit within those walls. Not everyone deserved to. But those who did, whether by blood or choice, created something stronger than the brittle image my daughter once tried to polish. By Christmas, a year after the night she disinvited me, the house was ready again. Lights curled across the terrace, music rehearsed, tables set. Guests arrived, laughter rising like tide. Among them was my daughter, arriving not with defiance, but with humility. She carried no excuses, only a dish she had cooked herself, and beside her, Adrian carried wine. Miles rushed past them straight into my arms, shouting, "Grandma, I'm home!" The moment held everything: pain, healing boundaries, and the stubborn endurance of love. We had not erased the past. We had not undone years of silence or shame. But we had built something sturdier: a table where respect was the entry ticket, where family meant choice as much as blood, where even the broken could begin again if they were willing to do the work. And as I looked across the room, the lesson crystallized like salt on the air. Protecting yourself is not selfish. Boundaries are not cruelty. Love without respect is only another chain. But when love and respect walk together, even the most fractured families can find a way forward, not perfect, not polished, but real. So, I lifted my glass one final time and told them all, family is not about who shares your name. It's about who shares your respect.